Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to talk about Synology 2-bay NAS and helping you decide what's the best one for your needs and getting it right first time. Now, maybe you got a Google Drive docking around somewhere, you got some Microsoft space on your OneDrive, maybe a cheeky little Dropbox, but one way or another you might have loads of cloud providers, maybe you're paying a subscription and you've reached a point where you're suddenly looking at the annual numbers, looking at how much it's costing you and going, do you know what, I'm just going to get my own server, it can't be that difficult, right? And for the most part you would be correct. Buying your own network attached storage device has now never been so easy, with so many turnkey solutions that are hardware and software combined together for you to set up relatively easily, and a number of them quite affordably. There's a lot of good choices out there, and I think a lot of users look at the brand Synology and its reputation for not only a lovely bit of software that's user friendly, but also just a general very good reputation in terms of security, access, customer services and availability there. And in this video I want to show you all of their current available 2-bay NASs, talk a little bit about buying refurbished ones as well, and hopefully help you decide which one's best for you. Now, 2-bay NASs, as the name suggests, is a NAS with 2 bays, 2 storage bays you can occupy with hard drives or SSDs. Traditionally SATA in most cases, there's very few exceptions at least the time of recording in Synology's 2-bay catalogue, but these are systems that you can run in a standard RAID configuration of RAID 1 where 2 drives are mirrored, or a RAID 0 where it combines it together. And there's other storage features such as expandability that we'll talk about later on, and also support of things called M2 NVMEs that we'll touch on. But before we start talking about the current available lineup there, what about if you're one of those users that's thinking, do you know what, I'm going to go second hand. I'm sure I can pick up some of these things on Amazon Seller Central, eBay, Marketplace, Craigslist, whatever you're going to do. And you're right, it's very easy to pick up older generation 2-bay network attached storage devices. There's many of them listed here, some of them going back as much as 10, even some of them into the noughties of the 2000s to available to buy. You can get some real bargains there with a number of these, and if you go to buy it now, again, you're going to get some very good options, much cheaper, as you can see, I'm sure, from the right hand side of the screen there on some of that pricing. So why shouldn't you do that? Well, actually, there's lots of reasons why it's okay to do that, but one of the reasons you shouldn't do that is to do with support. Now, if we look at some of these, there's ones like current generation devices like the 220, or we could look at this one here, the DS214 Plus. DS214 Plus coming up on a decade old, this system here, and again it's a Plus series. It's going to have a moderately decent CPU. Well, actually it's not that great, to be perfectly honest with you, but it's a 10-year-old NAS. Then again, you could have gone to Amazon, look up some of the older generation models. You might strike it lucky. Just make sure you click include out of stock. You might find devices on here that aren't strictly available anymore. Now, the reason that can be problematic is to do with that software, because remember, this NAS is going to be on for days, weeks, months, maybe even years, with intermittent restarts when you've got the firmware updates, and that's the big word, because firmware updates aren't just about adding new features and allowing you to do things quicker, easier, supporting a few new mobile apps. No, there's a few extra features that need to be factored in, and one of them is security updates. Synology software, like a lot of software, is built on Linux, and alongside them managing their own platform, Linux, in every different kernel and version that gets released, ultimately as soon as a new version of Linux, which is what this and lots of other platforms are built on, gets rolled out, hackers and dodgy people around the world are trying to find vulnerabilities to get into it and gain control to your data, often not to delete it, but to encrypt it or ultimately take away access for you and charge you to get it back. Ransomware. So those security patches and updates are incredibly important, arguably in terms of long-term data retention, way more important than those of new features. And older generation devices eventually fall off the grid. So, for example, we can switch here. This is the list of all supported products by Synology. And if we open up Control F and we look up DS214 Plus, we can see that it is discontinued. It has limited service right now, and limited service will often mean that you're not going to be getting the full complement of updates there. So we can see with the OS firmware updates, we can say whether we want to see the ones that have limited service. And again, what that results in terms of hardware or software, is that you might not receive relevant security updates that are incredibly important to your system, depending on the age of the device you go for. And therefore, you might be setting yourself up to move from the cloud onto your own private NAS, turning it on, unaware that there is a vulnerability out there that you can no longer be patched for. So there are tremendous savings to go for some of the older generation NASs, and I could make this video 100 times longer and talk about every sodding 2-bay Synology I've ever released. However, I'm only focusing on the devices available right now in their current lineup of 2-bays that are new, because I don't want to talk about old devices when you might go for one of these and it may have a vulnerability. If you're going to keep it offline the whole time, that's a different conversation entirely there. Now, the last thing I'll say is if you do want to go down the pre-owned route, it's worth taking a look at Synology's own certified repair area. They do refurbished NASs, where they have taken either NASs that developed faults and then taken them back to the point of manufacture and repaired them officially, or they have taken components and brought them together from other ranges that have drawn to a close to rebuild previous generation devices. Either way, the refurbished element area of Synology provides you the exact same solutions that you will find from perhaps 1 or 2 generations older, but with the added benefit that you get the full warranty support from the brand. So you're not going to be getting some 6-12 month fob off warranty. You're getting the full warranty. So if it had 5 or 3 years warranty when it was new, you're getting 3 to 5 years warranty with the refurb. Secondly, you get economies to be made as well. Case in point, if you go to the Synology shop in your region, and again that will depend there at the top where you are in the world, you scroll down and you may find, as you can see in the refurbished area, like here, a DS920. And the DS920 might be available in your region. Now again, it will depend where you are, and you can check the regions you're in, and you will have to search because stock will be light, but you can end up getting older generation devices with the full warranty support like new from the brand themselves at a lower price point. So if you're going to go pre-owned, check there first. It's going to cost a little bit more than your eBays and your Facebook marketplaces, but you're getting that support, and that is incredibly important. But now let's rock on with the current generation of 2-bays and what's good and which one's best suited to you. Now, my first NAS, I already sort of showed it earlier on, is the Synology DS220j. This is entry level with a slight twist. Now, this system runs on the RTD1296, a 64-bit quad-core ARM processor, but at least not a 32-bit. It's an ARM v8 processor, and Synology have done a lot of work with their DSM platform on this NAS. It even supports the latest version of their software, DSM++, although certain features to do with encryption and immutable backups are not available on this due to that hardware architecture. This CPU, indeed, we saw on a range of mid-tier solutions in the 2017-18 series in 1, 2 and 4-bay NAS devices. It's got 1 GBE on the rear, it's got USB 3 connectivity all the way through, and ultimately, for the price point that you can find knocking around on Newegg and Amazon and B&H and stuff between 149 and 179, an incredibly capable and good entry point into their ecosystem. If you're looking at DLNA, streaming locally, that sort of thing, great stuff. If you're looking at an incredibly low-end PLEX media server, and even then really pushing it a bit, this might do the job. Ultimately, for low-level backups or as an extra layer to your existing backup strategy, this is a halfway decent NAS. What really bottlenecks it is this, the memory. Because although we've seen this CPU on a bunch of other devices, and it's been around now for the better part of 5, maybe even 6 years at this point, that memory of half a gig is what significantly strangles this device. Now, moving things up a notch, those of you that already took the time to look up here above me at the price points here may have noticed that there's almost £100 price difference between 2 devices here, which seems really peculiar, right? Well, the DS223 here, what you were getting for somewhere between $80 to $100 is the following. First and foremost, although it does arrive, again, with a quad-core quad-core ARM-based processor at 64-bit, what you're getting is a newer generation component. It's still very much built of the same ilk, but it's a newer generation processor that has had a better handling of multimedia decoder with a little bit, I'm not going to call it integrated graphics, but certainly an area of this processor has graphical support of things like 4K, but it also arrives with 2 gig of memory there. So alongside the device having, the same USB 3 connectivity and network connectivity, what you're getting is a more capable processor inside, but you're also getting 4 times the amount of memory. So ultimately it means with this system, it opens the door to utilizing BTRFS as your file system for much lower resource consuming snapshots there in the background and shared folder recreation, and file self-healing as data is checked as it passes through it during the write operation thanks to BTRFS and file self-healing. But on top of that, it means you can access containers with Synology's Container Manager application, and again, supporting DSM+2. And although at the moment we're seeing a slight sluggish nature of third-party applications rolling out support for this, because this CPU hasn't really been explored in the way the previous Realtek RTD1296 had been up to this point, above and beyond everything I said that the DS220j can do, this can do it better. It arrives with that extra amount of oomph from the bonnet under the bonnet, which means if you are looking at utilizing Synology's DSM platform, not just behind the rest of your current existing storage system, but as a primary NAS system, this is the true entry point into Synology's DSM platform there. Whether you're going to run it as a low-end Apple Time machine, you want to use Synology Drive to recreate the GUI and the shared collaboration team folder architecture with client devices that you have currently with Dropbox or Google Drive, you can do that on this. With this system supporting, I would say, more than 80 to 85% of Synology's software options, the majority of the collaboration suite, whether that is for multimedia, whether that is utilizing some of the Office applications or some of the backup applications like Hyper Backup there. It doesn't give you access to some of the more enterprise-grade features, those are we're going to touch on in a moment, but if you are looking to jump into the Synology platform and you want a little bit of the whole Synology experience, but at an incredible budget point, the DS223 is very much the NAS for you. So, on to the DS220 Plus, arguably one of the oldest NASs in this entire lineup here. The DS220 Plus arrived in late spring, early summer of 2020. And this device arriving with an Intel dual-core processor there, the J4025 CPU there, with 2 gig of DDR4 memory that could be upgraded. Remember, that's a new thing here, up to 6 gig overall. This system, with a couple of LAN ports there on the rear, can pretty much support every Synology service, but in an affordable way. It's by no means a high-end business system, but I would say this is where we tip from entry-level into SMB, where we enter into the early stages of prosumer. This system with PLEX media server support there, of the 4 NASs here, I would say unless you're going to be going for pretty much egregious use, this is the PLEX media server 2-bay of the entire lineup in the current generation of Synology systems there. It's still not tippity-toppity, and it doesn't compare really to things like the DS920 for a number of reasons there, and it's not expandable either in terms of storage, which is a real shame. But overall, this is where, if you want to use a Synology system for PLEX Media Server, if you want to use it for surveillance, very important, because although surveillance was supported in Surveillance Station with a couple of camera licenses on the previous 2 devices, though in those 2 devices, surveillance will eat up more than half, potentially 2/3 of the system resources, just to use the 2 cameras in Surveillance Station on the previous 2 devices. This, on the other hand, due to it having an x86 64-bit architecture and having that extra memory upgradability, this is just a better system for all of those Synology services. As unlike the other ones, which were 80 to 85% support, this supports all of those applications. It's just because it's a dual-core architecture and the limitation of 2 to 6 gig of memory does present something of a glass ceiling there. And of course, the lack of expandability will hamper you a little bit short long term. And at the price point of $299 there, sometimes when you're looking at this, weighing up what you actually need, this is where you also might think about moving on to a 4-bay NAS, like the DS420j or the 418 at the time of recording. Again, Just focus on, when it comes to the price points, that thing to do with the CPU and that architecture, because with the ARM-based processors there, the reason ARM or ARM-based processors are affordable is because of the way they compress instruction, and therefore the extent to the applications they can support is a lot more limited. And therefore, when you have an x86 processor like this one, you can give it much more complex and detailed commands combined with its integrated graphics on board, meaning it can run significantly more applications than those two NASs mentioned before, and it has better expandability for what it can do. Just remember, it's a dual core though. And on to the business. We can talk about the DS723, arguably the most businessy NAS of the 5. Now, why is that? Well, there's a few reasons. First and foremost, although it is a dual-core CPU, it's a dual-core 4-thread AMD processor here. It's the R1600. It's a 2.6 gigahertz, so noticeably higher clock speed than everything we talked about thus far. That can also be burst to 3.1 gigahertz, but it doesn't have integrated graphics. More on that later on. It also arrives with 2 gig of DDR4 memory, which feels a little wimpy, but it can be upgraded to a staggering 32 gig of memory. This ain't just normal memory. This is ECC, error correcting code or error code correction. This is memory that as data passes through the system, it does a parity, a blueprint, if you will, on an extra module on the memory as it passes through, and at the end of the memory, if there's any inconsistencies seen as the data is being cached and utilized and eventually written during that process, it will then repair that. Not dissimilar to that of BTRFS, but it also adds another layer to ensure that your data remains consistent and intact, which particularly with larger data sets, with regards to the larger zipped up archives, is essential for business. Also with this system alongside that, it also has support of not only an expandability in memory and in storage, with support of adding 5 bays of storage with an expansion, but alongside the 2 1 gigabit Ethernet ports, which by the way support link aggregation, port trunking, and of course SMB multi-channel, a much more convenient way to combine those together. But on top of that, it also supports 10 GBE via an optional upgrade. Now, the optional upgrade, if we go back to the Synology store, go back there, is a small little module known as the E10G-T1. This little add-on card here allows you to upgrade it retail approximately around $149 to $179 depending on where you shop. And this little upgrade module here will allow you to add a 1000 megabytes per second bandwidth tunnel between you and your system. So if you are looking at video editing, if you are looking at photo editing here on 10 GBE on the NAS locally, but also taking advantage of the cloud services, or the remote access services and the local access services on a multi-user environment, this is very much going to be the NAS you want to look at there. And on top of that, with that ECC memory ensuring those much faster data transfers are consistent, combined with BTRFS and DSM+2 with not only low impact file volume encryption, but also those immutable backups thanks to write once, read many, or worm. This all adds up to a far more robust long-term system for business. And what it lacks in embedded graphics, which unless you know you're going to use it for things like encode, decode of multimedia and transcoding in your specific multimedia setup, or you're running more complex cameras that are H.265 LED, although there is an H.265 license within DSM for certain applications. Overall, unless you know you're going to need integrated graphics on your system for live graphical output, I would strongly recommend this for any high-speed file service utilization. Again, anything to do with large-scale backups, anything to do with huge volume or huge frequency sharing there, and of course, any photo, video editors, not just those backing up, should really look at this NAS too. There's only one NAS to look at now, but it's quite a weird one. And our final 2-bay is arguably something a little on the cusp, and that is the DVA1622. What makes this different? Well, the DVA1622 is their deep video analysis series, available in a 4-bay and a 2-bay. Unlike the 4-bay, which has a graphics card and costs about £1 million squillion quid, the 2-bay device here, again, hugely targeted towards surveillance here. This system here not only has much more camera licenses than any other system, arriving with 8 camera licenses by default. And despite its modest architecture running on the Intel Celeron here, the J4125, so the quad-core version of the CPU we talked about over here, this CPU also arrives, again, 6 gig of memory. I would expect it to be the full complement of memory there. It also has HDMI out for your local standalone surveillance system to really make the most of Synology's surveillance system. Now, look at that price point. It is a big old jump from what we've seen thus far, $629 there. But the camera licenses, which remember are long-term, they're not subscription-based, they are forever, allow you to use this system with 8 cameras, also supporting AI-related services, all from within the system. The AI-supported services within Surveillance Station are more typically locked to one of 2 locations. One on a DVA system, like the 2 or even the 4 bay here, or they're locked into Synology's cameras, something we've talked about already, with Synology's cameras here, which have a lot of those AI-supported services on the camera side. And again, these are to do, and not all of them are included. License plate recognition, stuff like that, is not rolled in. You'd have to go for the deeper 4-bay system there, but still nonetheless, you do still have a large complement of the AI tasks possible on this device. And although this 2-bay is built not dissimilar to the DS720 that came before it, and it lacks the 10 GB upgradability of the DS723, if you're looking at the most capable Synology 2-bay for surveillance because you were impressed by their surveillance platform, this is the one you need to go for, unless you think you're going to be utilizing other features and services of DSM, because you can still get this software to a lesser degree in any Synology NAS. It just happens that to get it at its best, in its most compact but capable form, the DVA1622 is very much the way to go. But this has been buying a Synology 2-bay NAS and getting it right first time. Have you enjoyed this? Have you found it helpful? It's very hard to find a line talking about this subject without getting too much into the weeds, a bit too inside baseball, and ultimately not talking about things that you may or may not know. So I do talk about everything to do with NAS here on the channel, and I've linked to a number of guides in the description. If you've got any further questions, of course, though, and you don't quite know what you need to go for, we run a completely free advice section. I say completely. We do a free advice section below on NAS Compares. There is a few paid options on there. You can ignore them. Use the free one if you want. Alternatively, we've got the Discord now open, where you can ask other members of the NAS community. And of course, we've got the forum as well, Ask NAS Compares, to answer your questions there as well. And of course, you can always ask me here in the comments. Otherwise, if you have found this video helpful, very important, and if you were going to shop at B&H, at Newegg, at eBuy, at Scan, at Amazon, if you were going to do that anyway, and you found this video helpful, please use the links in the description to take you there. Anything you buy, once you click that link and it takes you there, and it doesn't cost you anything extra, no data is collected. If you go and use that link, the result is that anything you buy, we get a kickback. It's just me and Eddie here doing this, and every tiny little nugget allows us to keep doing what we do. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.